Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. It is Saturday, so we're shooting another financial education video. On Wednesdays is when we do portfolio reviews. And for those of you who are new to the channel, my name is Paul Novak and I absolutely love all things personal finance. I really created this channel just as a way to share tips and tricks and really help others put their money to work. Most of our content on here is all geared towards beginners, and this week's actually going to be no different. I kind of asked in our Facebook group what video you wanted me to cover, and we got back from a lot of different people that we wanted to go over index funds. So this video is really going to be geared towards just breaking down the simplicity of index funds. And now that I talked about the Facebook group, this is probably as good of a time as any. I'll share the link up here and post it in the description below. But we have created a Facebook group, and really we did it just as a way to have a community for people that are interested in saving or starting to invest, that people can come and ask questions and we can kind of learn from each other. And as I always state, if you find this video helpful, smash the like button and subscribe. Comments are always welcome. We respond back to all comments. And if you're interested in starting to save or invest, I've got a ton of different links down below. Not going to go through them all, but with those links is promo cash for free money, also options for free stocks. So yeah, check out that description. And with that being said, let's get into it for the week. And like I said earlier, this week we're really going to cover what an index fund is, why I feel they're better than stocks for investing, why I recommend these investments so much for beginners, how to perform some basic research on index funds, and really what my picks are for my favorite index funds. And remember, I've got chapters down below, so if there's something specific you want to see out of that content, click specifically on it. You don't have to watch the whole video. Go to the content that interests you the most. All right, so let's start off with what is an index fund. And I'm going to compare an index fund to a stock. And I'm going to keep this very basic. So when you buy a stock, you're actually buying shares in one specific company. When you buy one index fund, that fund actually holds multiple different stocks. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put up here on a screen an illustration just to make it easier to understand. Okay, so if you look here on the screen, I've got a stock, right? And it just shows the Apple logo, right? Because just like I stated, a stock is nothing more than one company. Now, over to the right, I've got an illustration of what an index fund looks like. And I'm starting with this one because it's extremely basic. But as you can see, that one index fund actually holds 4 different companies. We've got Apple, we've got Facebook, we've got Amazon, and we've got Microsoft. So an index fund is different because it holds all those different companies. Now, that picture was extremely basic. Now I'm going to show you a real world example. So this picture up here on the screen actually shows the breakdown of the S&P 500 index and all the different companies that are associated with it. Alright, so I wanted to show this picture of the S&P 500 index, but I did it second because looking at the picture, it just looks crazy complicated and overwhelming. But this is really what the S&P 500 index looks like. And I shared this because I can actually cover 2 concepts when looking at this. So the first one I've already talked about. You can see how within this index, there are a ton of different companies that make it up. But the second thing, and I think this is something people might not understand, is that not all of the holdings within the index are distributed equally. So if you look here, if I pick on Apple, right, because that's the biggest company in the world, it also makes up a lot bigger portion of the pie in that S&P 500 than what some of these other smaller companies are when you can just see little fractions of a share. Right? So just because an index has 4 companies, 5 companies, 500 companies in, don't think that all of those companies have the exact same weight within the index. That's something I want to make sure that you guys understand. And an index fund is passively managed, and that's what makes it different than mutual funds. And I'm not going to go into all the details now, but passively managed just means instead of having a person pick all of the holdings, there are indexes that are already established out there that they're just going to track. So think of the S&P 500. The NASDAQ, the Dow Jones Index, right? Those are all indexes that are established that these funds are just set up that as they adjust, the fund will adjust with it. And for that reason, the expense ratios on index funds are really low. And I'm going to talk about those expense ratios later on in the video. So another thing I just wanted to cover, because I see people asking a lot of questions, is there are tons of different index funds out there, and they go from ranging to the whole stock market all the way down to very niche markets. So one of the examples I'm going to give is VOO. Right, that is an index fund that's set up to track the S&P 500, the entire S&P 500. There are offshoots of that index fund. So you can see VOOG is another index fund. That still tracks the S&P 500, but instead of all of the companies, it's only looking at the growth companies within the S&P 500. Then there's another offshoot called VOOV. And people have asked, well, what is that? What's the difference? It's just another offshoot of the S&P 500, but this time we're only going to look at the value companies within the index. So I want you to think of it this way. VOO is the full pie, right? It tracks the entire S&P. VOOG only tracks the growth companies and takes the other ones out. VOOV only tracks the value companies within the S&P 500. So that is what makes up so many different index funds. But if you're looking and you're going, well, wait a minute, these look very similar. It's probably just a more narrowed down specific index versus the entire index. All right, so hopefully that breaks down, at least at a pretty simplified level, what an index fund is. Now I want to talk about why I like these for investments more than individual stocks. And the first reason that I'm going to give is diversification. And again, I'm not going to go through all of the explanation on diversification. I've got a video that covers that if you want to see it in greater detail. But in a nutshell, you're buying one fund that tracks so many different companies, right? If you buy an S&P 500 index fund, you instantly gained access to 500 different companies, right? That's very good from a diversification standpoint. And the second thing that I think is so cool about it is if you're a beginning investor, or let's even say you've been investing for many, many years, right? But your whole life doesn't revolve around investing. You don't want to be checking your account every day, finding out if your company's being successful, is it going backwards, how are things going? An index fund, you can literally set it and forget it. And I'll explain that a little bit further. So earlier this year, Tesla grew to one of the 500 largest companies in the United States, right? So again, I'm going to go back to an S&P 500 index fund. Once it grew to that size, it got added to the S&P 500. So if you held a fund like VOO that tracks that index, automatically, without you having to do anything, once it got added to the S&P 500, that company and its holdings got added to that average. So you automatically bought Tesla without having to do anything. And on the flip side of that, if you're invested in a company that's all of a sudden falling off the map and you really start to perform poorly, that company's automatically going to get removed from the S&P 500 index and you won't be invested in them anymore. So I think it just gives you peace of mind that you've got something that is being managed or being upkept without you needing to do any research or follow it, which is really nice. All right, so what I want to do is just show you some of the things that I look for. I'm only going to go over three main things in here for index funds, but I use a website called Morningstar. Super simple. I like it. I'm going to search. We've been talking so much about VOO, I'll just stay consistent with it. So I'm going to click on VOO here. And you're going to see that it pulls up this ETF, right? Think of that as the same as index fund. So as I scroll down here, one of the first things that I'm going to see is the expense ratio. So I'm not going to explain all of this and what this all means. I'll link a video to my expense ratios where you can see kind of what they cost and how they eat into your profits long term. I will just say this, because this fund is managed, even though it's passively managed, there still are some fees associated with it. So anytime you buy an index fund, and this is different than a stock, you will have to pay something for that holding. But when I say that the expenses are really, really cheap, when you see this 0.03%, what that means is that for every $1,000 you hold in this fund, you're going to pay 30 cents a year in fees. So it's nothing crazy or anything to be scared of, at least with this fund, but it is something that I like to look at. There are a lot of different index funds that track the S&P 500 out there. They do not all have the same cost. So if you're going to have something that looks at that index, let's say, why not find the one at the cheapest price, right? So that's something you're going to want to look at, is just before you invest in an index, what does it cost? All right, yeah, so when I look at this right here, right, this dividend, it's going to show what that's actually paying out. And I know I probably sound like a broken record, but I'm not going to get into what dividend payments are and exactly how all that works and how to calculate it, because, shocker, I've got another video on dividends, so I'll place a link to that if it's something that you really want to check out. But I like seeing what the expense ratios are and then also what the dividend pays out. But what I really like probably the most here on Morningstar is I can click on portfolio and give it a second to load because my computer's just rocket fast. But as we scroll down here, it's way at the bottom. Here, it shows current holdings, right? So in this fund, VOO, and this gets back to the point that I made earlier, it's going to show what the holdings are. So it's Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, Facebook. Shocker that those were the four that I put in my picture that I shared earlier, because they're the top four in VOO. But here you can see all of the different companies, and I could keep scrolling down. And it's also going to show what the weight of each one is, right? So you can see that Apple is the highest, and as I continue to scroll down, these weights just keep getting smaller and smaller and smaller. So that goes back to the point that I made earlier, that every single company within an index is not going to be equally weighted. So, but you know, before you jump into an index, if you want to see, okay, what kind of companies are in there, what's this holding all about, this is just a quick way to research 3 really quick things on expense ratios, what their dividend payments are, and also what companies make up the portfolio. All right, like I stated, I was going to go over what index funds I use and what my picks are, and I'll let the excitement start with a little drum roll. But for me, really, it's only 2 index funds. I'm pretty sure you figured out VOO by now because I've talked about it all the way throughout the video. But an index fund that tracks the S&P 500, I think, is critical to have in any portfolio. And for me, the only other index fund that I hold is VTI. And that is an index that tracks the entire stock market. So it's really as unspecified as you could possibly get. And for me, you know, if you've got other index funds that you guys swear by and think that they're the best, post them in the comments below. I'm still learning myself. But when I look at the index funds that I hold, because people say, well, why don't you have more? Those index funds have 3,500 companies as part of them. It's actually even more than 3,500. So when it comes from a diversification standpoint, I truly don't know why I need more companies than that 3,500. To me, that is more than enough. So I'm just going to close this out by saying that I think that index funds are the way to go for beginning investors and even experienced investors alike. And for me, no matter how big my portfolio gets, I plan to stay committed to having 50% or more of that portfolio always with index funds, right, versus individual holdings. And I'm going to share a little fun fact with you, and this is true, go look it up if you want to, is that the S&P 500 over a 20-year average has never had negative returns in the history of it being out there. So if you look at any 20-year period in time, the returns have been positive. So I think, what does that say if you're going to be a long-term investor? Why would you not want to put your money in the S&P 500? So obviously nobody knows what the future is going to hold, but with a track record like that, I think it's a pretty safe bet for making money. And I share all of this information on index funds because I really do enjoy investing, and I want to try and help other people get ahead and guide them towards investments that are going to help them do that. So for me, it is very frustrating to see beginners that are starting and they're buying high volatility crypto or buying into crazy meme stocks or, putting all their money into one stock, because I've seen with a lot of those people, they'll have short bursts of success which get them excited, but then when it crashes, right, they say investing's not for me, this stinks, I'm out of here. And it's not because investing doesn't work, it's because they're taking on way too much risk. Right? So for me, and I would recommend this to everybody out there, when you're starting your portfolio, start it with index funds and really, really use that to build your stable base. And if you are truly interested in starting to invest, I'll place a link to my video where you can do it in 3 simple steps. It's not that complicated, and shocker, I highly recommend index funds as part of that video. And remember, I'm not a financial professional. I'm just a guy who's crazy into investing in personal finance and want to try and share my tips and tricks with you guys. Hopefully you found this video helpful, and if you did, as I always state, smash that like button and subscribe. Like I said earlier, if you want to get started investing or saving, I've got a ton of different links down below. And with that being said, I'd like to thank you guys for following along and watching our video. And I hope to see you back here next week where we're going to talk more about saving, investing, and spending money. Have a good weekend.